Is there any push at all, or any appreciation these days that the culture that the British brought to this continent was at the time probably the most superior culture in the world at that time? Is there any perception of that in that you've encountered while you were campaigning, or from the schools that your kids attend?
Well, I think this shows how impoverished the educational curriculum is now, that, when you explain to people that half the world's population do not live under the rule of law. I mean, I think we're asleep at the wheel here in Australia. We are not taught to understand how fortunate we are, how unusual it is to be living in such a peaceful, prosperous nation where we don't have war, where by and large, violence, it's not on the streets, it's not, we're not living in towns where there's earthquakes, where everything's collapsed and there's no resources to come and fix it. But when we look at the system that we live under, representative democracy based on a Westminster system, I mean, that has provided humankind with the most stable and prosperous and fair system of governance that I would argue humankind has ever seen. I mean, with access to justice, whether, the fact that we can go to the police, we can go through the court system. It's not perfect. We all understand that. But as an ordinary person, you have the right to make a complaint to the police. You have the right to put up your hand to run for Parliament. And these are really things that we should be celebrating. And instead of being told that this is wrong and it's colonial and it's white privilege, it's like, well, what other system do you want to have in place? Do we want to have a fascist dictator? Do we want to have a failed nation state like in Venezuela or, say, South Sudan? I think that we have really lost the plot when we think that Australia is a problematic country.
The way this debating contest is dressed up, it makes it look like the teachers are simply encouraging the kids to refine what they've been born into, which is a Western liberal democracy. But I'd argue that, in fact, the ultimate goal of all this wokeism is the complete replacement of the system and institutions that we have inherited, and it's the consequences of which will be an absolute nightmare. Now, do you think that what these kids are being indoctrinated into is a complete replacement of our system, or are they being encouraged just to refine what they've inherited?
Oh, no. There are forces at play that, in my view, want to completely upend society as we understand it. The Marxist socialists marching through the institutions, which they've been doing very effectively for decades. There are attacks on parental authority, attacks on the family, attacks on heterosexual couples, attacks on, I'm a lapsed Catholic myself, but attacks on things like the church, the Judeo-Christian culture. There are attacks on our judiciary. And I want to say, to what end? I mean, with respect to, say, the gender identity argument, who benefits when we teach children to be divorced from the material reality of their bodies, when we are constantly breaking down the age of consent, when we are allowing the state to come in and make it unlawful into families and make it unlawful for parents to protect their children, for parents to instill the values that they want to instill, when we are constantly teaching our children that they are under threat from, extinction. We've got Extinction Rebellion. We've got everything's going to become extinct. We've got the climate ideology. We're all going to, either be washed away or burn up in bushfires. So you've got these kids who are in a constant state of anxiety. For what reason? So I'm like, what purpose is this serving? And, it also goes to the question of, like, we've had the pandemic. Now we're having this push for renewables. And in my view, both of those events are basically just a huge transference of wealth from the middle class to the elite. So I think, and then if we go to the voice, for example, we are looking at upending our entire system of governance with respect to that, and we're just being told, be kind, be inclusive, don't be racist, but to put a body in that is not beholden to the executive or the legislatures, and we'll end up governing ourselves by fighting things out in the judiciary. I mean, that's unprecedented. That is not modest, and that is not kind. That is a complete reordering of how we organise ourselves here in Australia. So I very much think there are people here who want to upend everything that we've worked so hard for over centuries now here in Australia to have a functional representative democracy.